Hello and welcome to the Choreolosophy Podcast. This is Chris Muntz, and this is episode 67, part 1, How to Create Your Musician's Credo with Vince Peterson. Vince and I got to talking about some of our pet peeves around how the music education world is structured, and it ended up being such an in-depth conversation. I mean, we really took the gloves off, that I decided I needed to put it into two parts because I was first thinking, do I whittle this down and edit it so it's a more reasonable length? But it was just all too good, you guys. So I decided to keep everything and have us release this in two parts because there ended up being two distinct portions of our conversation. In the first portion, we went through almost like a psychoanalysis of me, led by Vince, using an exercise that he's built, and he's done this with his students many times. And it's an exercise where he helps a student build their own musician's credo. And I'm going to encourage you to listen to this episode and then go do it yourself. He graciously, Vince did, shared this PDF of what he has his students do with you, and it's in the show notes of the episode, and I'm going to encourage you to go through that. But once you've heard his explanation and heard me attempt to answer some of his questions and get kind of scratching the surface, because he said this takes a while. You know, this is something you work on for a while, but I think I'm going to do it. And it's going to be very valuable for me, and I know it will be for you as well. Because one of my biggest pet peeves in music education reform conversations is what I see as an outsized focus on discussion of what's wrong with music education. When you compare that to the amount of time that we hear people spending to suggest an actual solution, okay, it's easy to criticize. It is much harder to build something better. Contrary to popular belief, you can't solve a problem with criticism by itself. You have to put forth the next step. And so what Vince is doing is he's putting forward some next steps. This musician's credo idea is a really important next step, because if we don't know what our own musical belief system is, where do we fit into the musical ecosystem? Where do we fit into the musicians of the world? What do we put forth? And you're going to hear Vince say this later, but what do we put forth and what are we going to not put forth because it's not our thing? Right. So this is a really important conversation and a really important exercise to work through. And then, of course, you're going to want to tune in to the second part of the episode where Vince and I are going to be discussing his brainstorm, which is yet another step that he's putting forward that is called Greenhouse Music, which is a new online conservatory. And he's going to talk about how that's going to address some issues of access, some issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which of course we all support that concept. But then if we're talking about that conservatory, that super elite conservatory level of the music world, that's a tougher nut to crack because of the entrenched traditions that are there. And Vince, I don't want to spoil that part too, but Vince has some awesome ideas. And he and I really kind of, again, take the gloves off in talking about how some of these problems have persisted and ways that we think that they could be better. So tune in for that. So we're going to get right to Vince here with limited announcements. But one of the ones that I'm going to throw in there before we get to the episode is that the Patreon page is continuing to offer all of its normal stuff, like a once a month episode where I give you a bunch of behind the scenes that's going on with the show. So I tell you kind of what I'm thinking, not only what I'm thinking that should be on the show, but I do a lot of reflecting in those Patreon only episodes, reflecting on past shows and feedback that I get from the audience, those types of things. That's my sounding board over there at Patreon. So I'm still doing that. But in addition to that, the Choreolosophy convention that happened in Atlanta in April has a bunch of recorded live sessions. And the audio is not awesome because we were in a big hotel ballroom. And so I had to boost it quite a bit to get it to be listenable. But the quality of those sessions was so high. Like, oh my goodness, it's worth listening to the fuzz a little bit and turning up your headphones so that you can hear those. So that content is going to continue to be added over the next few weeks and months, a little bit at a time, to give you a chance to digest it because a lot happened that weekend. And that's going to be part of the Patreon podcast feed. Okay, so you can find that there. You can also program it once you're a subscriber. You can program your regular podcast listener to take in those episodes as they come out, and they just pop up into your phone next to the regular podcast, which will of course continue to be free. So that is a way you can support the show, but also get some extra professional development and some extra learning and all kinds of things that are going on over there at the Patreon page. Okay, you guys, dig in. Here comes Vince Peterson. All right, everybody. I am here with Vince Peterson, and Vince is a choral director and an innovator in the choir music world. And we're going to be learning today from Vince about how to create our own credo as musicians. And we're going to be, of course, discussing what that means and talking about just really a lot of things as it relates to, you all know as listeners, my favorite thing to talk about on this show is thinking deeply about what it is that we do and why we do it. And so Vince is going to give his perspective on that. So welcome, Vince, to the show.
Thank you so much.
So and it is Vince and not Vincent.
Vince is it. Yeah.
Vince is it. Okay. All right. Great.
I mean, well, Vincent is the legal name, but I go by Vince for most people who know me.
Right. Okay. Gotcha. I just want to make sure I was not being informal in an inappropriate way.
Oh, believe me, I've been called every name in the book.
How about Vinny and the Jets?
So Vinny is what my cousins and my aunt and my uncle and grandmother on my mother's side call me. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you've had that. So for the few people that prefer to watch the show on YouTube, tell us about this background that you're standing in front of. Or of course, it's a digital background, but it's a really cool picture.
Well, thank you. I'm into the idea of things growing, especially green things. Green is my favorite color, but I like the idea of relating photosynthesis to the ecosystem of music, and to the idea of a greenhouse or a green space being a safe place of harboring new musicians as they come up and come of age and get ready to join the workforce. In this safe space, they are sprouted and grown to their healthiest selves before they're put out into the world. So, I mean, yeah, succulents, I'm all about it. And I just liked the contrasts in this. And I was following your instructions to a T to make sure I had a good background and everything. I'm just doing what I'm told, Chief.
That's wonderful. And I again, like you are my kind of guy. I can tell already, because even your background has a metaphor for choral music in it, which that's good stuff. All right, Vince. So why don't you tell my audience a little bit about yourself? I always like to hear from my guests about kind of their early entry into music and why you became a musician. In other words, what lit your fire, and then all the way into your education. What's your background?
So I was raised in San Francisco. I went to Catholic school all my life. My first piano teacher was a nun, and I, duly feared her and revered her. I was not the kind of kid who, got picked first for the kickball team. Most recess periods and lunch periods were spent inside practicing piano. And as I grew up, my parents, when my dad bought the first piano for me, he said, that thing is going to collect dust. And he later said, that was the biggest lie I ever told, or the biggest mistake I ever made. It ended up eventually that if I was ever bad or whatever, when a kid would get grounded or whatever, there was a padlock on the piano. That was the punishment.
Wow. Okay.
And that was what motivated me to do my schoolwork. So I would play piano, starting at the age of 6, at least 4 hours a day. This is very odd, very unlikely sort of thing, but it was the only thing I was interested in doing. And did my undergrad at San Francisco Conservatory, eventually did it in composition, study with Conrad Sousa, who became my mentor and very, very dear friend all the way until he died in 2013. And with David Conti, Eleanor Armour. After that, I went to Paris to study via the European American Music Alliance, study at the Schola Cantorum and then the École Normale in Paris over the summers. And I met my conducting teacher, Mark Shapiro, who is here in New York. And I said, wow, I was so moved by working with him. I said, where do you teach? I was very sort of insulated from the college or professional music world. I was very, if you would forgive the the expression, I was sort of untouched by any sort of regular expectation that people
Hmm.
would have in terms of a track that I hear a lot from students now about a track that they're on to become a high school choir director or a college choir director. I was not on any track. I kind of was feeling around in the dark the whole time, and I just happened to fall into place with some people who were really great people. I mean, I spent 2 years as assistant director and pianist for Joseph Jennings in Golden Gate Men's Chorus, and that's how I became affiliated with Chanticleer. Met Matthew Altman, who's now one of my best friends there. Moved to New York in '05 to do my master's at Mannes College of Music, which is now part of the New School. And they allowed me to double in composition and choral conducting. And I believe that Mannes really enabled us, in that way. I mean, it was a real challenge. I almost gave up after the first year. The ear training alone was, I mean, I don't know how to say it other than the stuff of nightmares.
Boot camp.
Yeah. And, I started to wonder when I was there, is there a way to give this training to other people without all the extra crap that comes with the competitive environment of the conservatory?
Mm-hmm.
So I've spent my career trying to figure that out. How do you navigate this in a holistic, humanistic, respectful way that invites people in to learning more about themselves and their own musicianship, rather than setting up tiers of, quality and worth between musicians, which has so terribly divided us all,
Yeah.
in so many ways. And I graduated in '07, and a year later, in January of '08, started Choral Chameleon.
Tell us about that. So that's a community-based choir, like a 501c3, like its own business. Tell us about that.
Choral Chameleon is actually it's a three things in one. We have a professional ensemble of 12 who are all paid, according to AGMA union scale, and then we have a volunteer-based ensemble that meets on Monday nights under normal circumstances,
Right.
and the ensemble, the paid ensemble, integrates into that larger choir to make it a semi-pro corps, or what Chorus America would call a pro corps choir. And then we have a training institute for composers and conductors of choral music, and we do that once or twice a year. I always say it's my 8 favorite days of the year. It's basically a choral music think tank where just about anything goes.
Okay.
And I mean, Chris, you wouldn't believe the things that have been thrown at me there. Choral Chameleon, since its inception, has now given over 180 world premieres of choral music, largely because of that institute. And we get everybody from first-time composers all the way to postdoctoral students who want to just try things and don't want to have, frankly, all the BS of people telling them what they should or shouldn't write for the choir.
Uh-huh.
So I think it's more about not what you should or shouldn't write, but if this is what you want, this is how it needs to be written on the paper in order for that to happen.
And then outside of the academic environment, you decide if it worked or not because you put it in front of an audience. And
yeah, I mean, we put them all in front of an audience every year, no matter what, and record them. But by that time, they've been through a very intensive 8-day vetting and editing process.
Right. Yeah, it sounds like a lot of parallels actually with your organization and the one that I run with Contract KC, because we have a small professional paid group that operates in and amongst several other programs that we try to do throughout the year, like an institute. We don't do composition stuff, but a youth institute where those pro singers actually step in and sing with kids, and then they collaborate in rehearsal and then put on performances and at the end of the week. And so there's so much innovation possible when we're out in the community doing stuff with choral music that that is harder to achieve sometimes in a school environment.
Yeah.
At least that's been my experience. I'm really fascinated with this idea that you have about helping people create their own belief statements in it as musicians. You call them a credo. And so first, I want you to tell us a little bit about where this idea comes from, as kind of, because it looks like you've got this set up as kind of a formal exercise. Like there's a step-by-step step that you can take us through here to help us do this for ourselves. Where did this idea come from?
I mean, I often say this, I'm quite sincere when I say this. I mean, I consider myself, I was raised as a Catholic. I was married to my husband in the Episcopal Church, and for all intents purposes, I'm a Christian by my upbringing. But I always say that music is my religion. Music is my organized religion. To commune with brothers and sisters and non-binary friends in the musical realm is a great privilege. Being here with you is a great privilege. I think that, I've witnessed a lot of musicians who are really hurting, really aching. This is before the pandemic. Really, if you'll forgive the word, jaded, not able to trust, not able to really put themselves out there. And, I decided, well, what is there a structured way that we can lead towards better thinking and discernment about who we are as musicians? It takes probing, it takes a certain kind of questioning. And we lead by example as well. So the musician's credo is meant to be a grounding thing. Once the person is settled on what it is that they believe in music, what it is that they attach themselves to, what they lift up into the light as far as their own musicianship is concerned, they can always go back to that when they need it, because our lives as musicians are full of no's. They're full of rejections. They're full of judgments. They're full of critics. Part of the reason we don't deal well with that is because we don't know who we are, what our worth is, really, where we're coming from.
Was there a class that you were teaching? Was it part of your institute? Where was this designed for?
It was designed for my private students.
Oh, okay.
And so I've done the exercise now with maybe 50 or 60 students. To do it most effectively, you need another person to be your mirror, to be your sounding board, to read your credo back to you so you can hear it come from somebody else's voice.
Yeah. So, all right. So walk us through this exercise. What if you were doing this in a room? This actually sounds like a perfect session for a choralosophy convention. We did one in Atlanta, and a lot of this kind of introspection in those sessions, because we keep them small so people can actually talk to each other. So let's pretend like that's what's happening, and you're gonna make me do this for the first time.
So we're doing the exercise so that you are crystal clear with yourself when you show up at the larger table. You're clear what you're bringing to the table, and also what you're not bringing to the table. And this will also help you celebrate what other people are bringing to the table, rather than feel competitive with it. And our old school, the ways that we grade, quantified ways that we grade, are very antiquated. They're not necessarily fully reflective of the modern world in the way that we, and I think we are also doing this to untie the knots that have been tied. And if a musician looks at me and says, I don't have any knots, I'm good, I'll say you're a damn liar. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So music school is a volatile, crazy place. I mean, of course, we don't have time to do the whole thing.
That's okay.
Today.
Just get a taste of it.
The most important to me. The maintaining the naivete to stay in love with music. Um, that was the hardest one for me. When I realized what it really meant to be a professional musician, it was hard for me to face the question, is this really what I want to do? And also that's the more important question than am I good enough to do this? A lot of skills can be learned. There's a great book by Jeff Colvin that's called Talent is Overrated. And I believe in the science of practice and of discipline. What you do is you start by answering these questions. And I've put a lot of questions here. There's 14 questions. But some of the most important ones that I will just highlight. What are the things that I do well in music? What are those that I do not do well? So there's a lot of choir directors out there who like to arrange. There's a lot of arrangers and composers out there who like to direct choirs, but the two are not one and the same. I once had a Haydn scholar say to me, there's nobody better than me to conduct the creation, and I was like, but you're a musicologist. Like, I was thinking this to myself. I didn't say this to the person, but like, I've not seen you conduct. Where are you now as a musician? First of all, how would you describe what you do today as a musician?
So I have the advantage of the head start that this is the type of question I think about a lot. So when someone asks me what I do or to describe what I do, the way I think of it is that I facilitate experiences for groups of people. I'm the person who has to put all the ducks in a row so that they can have musical experiences that I've already at one point in my life have gotten to have. So when I put on that hat of a conductor, I try to think of it from that perspective. I'm not there for, in that particular instance, so that I have the musical experience. I'm facilitating that for other people because someone else has done that for me at
So
some
you're paying
point.
it forward.
Yes. Now I wear different hats in different types. So sometimes when I'm a performer, I think of what I do as different. When I'm one of the performer in the ensemble, then I am there as part of a group trying to create synthesis with everyone else. And when I'm performing in an ensemble, then I'm trying to have that experience that I facilitate for other people. So to me, when I say facilitate experiences, I think everything about music for me that matters is the exchange between people. And of course, the medium that we use is notes and rhythms. But ultimately, we're using that to convey information, emotion, a story, whatever it is, in a very profound, connected way. That's what I do.
Well, I mean, I think that's wonderful, and I think that you're taking a very selfless, approach to the answer. But it leads me to another question.
Great.
With you, which is, where do you feel most musically fulfilled and satisfied? Can you describe a moment in which you are at the peak of satisfaction and of, let's say euphoria or musical nirvana? What is that moment like?
Okay, so I'll put my conductor hat back on then, since that was the I guess the more selfless of the answers. What, to be clear, I can understand why that sounds selfless in my answer, although it's very selfish as I look for it, because when I facilitate those musical experiences for others, as an ensemble musician, it's only when I bring everyone else along that I get to have those experiences for myself. So if I'm standing in front of a choir, I don't get to have that euphoria, that mountaintop moment of a climactic piece of music that's perfectly in tune and everyone's like resonating together and feeling together. If I don't do those selfless acts leading up to that, then I don't get to have the payoff. So there is definitely something in it for me in the sense that I'm wanting to facilitate those experiences for other people so that they can experience it for the first time. But then as the old guy in the room, when they finally do that work, and when they finally get to the point where they are really singing, I guess from that um, from from that instinct part of their brain. And as you know, if you work with students, you know that it takes quite a while for them to get past the decoding part of their brain as musicians, and into that just instinct part of their brain. And so for me, that's where the payoff happens, is when I get my young singers through that decoding phase and into the instinct phase, and we are just singing. And by when I finally get them to that point, I have a ton of euphoria, payoff, feeling like all that work was worth it. So that's really what I'm driving them towards.
Again, I think it's wonderful. It sounds to me like one sentence or two sentences that would end up in your credo could come from the sort of amalgam or the constellation of what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, maybe something along the lines of, as a conductor, I am a servant, of music. I am a servant of the people. I place their needs ahead of my own. And I am a part of an ecosystem of exchange, or vibration, communal connection, that requires all of its parts. It comes from the sum of all of its parts. Something like that.
Wow, you're good. You're good at this.
I've done it a couple times. Let me ask you a little bit of maybe a slightly uncomfortable question.
Great.
If obviously art is work, right? I mean, how do you feel when somebody says, "What do you do for a living?" and you say, "I'm a musician," or do you say, "I'm a musician," or do you say, "I'm a teacher"?
Yeah.
And somebody's, and what are the reactions that you get from people when you tell them that you're a professional musician?
So it depends, of course. Not everyone reacts the same way, but I would say that you do the least gratifying responses is usually some type of boredom, in the sense that sometimes people will react as if a musician is not a quote unquote real job, in the sense that it doesn't qualify you for participation in whatever serious big boy conversation is going on. And so there's that. But I would say, as I've gotten older, that response from people has become more rare. And maybe it's just because I've got gray in my beard and in my hair. And so I have a little bit more gravitas when I talk to people now than I did when I was, 24 or whatever. So there's part of that's natural in a human, but so I would say I don't answer that question though as I'm a teacher or I'm a musician. I tend to say that I teach people how to make music, or like I'll usually say something that sounds obtuse. I never give a straight answer to that question, and it's partly because of what you just said. Is I've kind of trained myself to not give a one word "I'm a teacher" or a one word "I'm a musician" answer, because at the very least I want to feel out the other person that I'm talking to about whether or not they're going to tune me out as soon as they hear that I don't sell stocks or something.
That must be a difficult thing to have to navigate when you're meeting new people and trying to explain what you do.
I am awful at small talk.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Oh, yeah. And this is something that my wife and I talk about all the time. When we go and meet people in a casual setting of non-musicians, I'm usually by myself for a while because I'm not interested. That's why I podcast. It's easy for me to come in and have a deep conversation with a total stranger like I'm doing right now. It's really hard for me to have small talk with someone I've just met. So my personality is that I would like to jump right to your deepest, darkest secrets from your childhood when we've just shaken hands. That's how how my brain works. And so when I think that could be, maybe now I'm being psychoanalyzed on my own show right now. This is great. But I think that I think that could be that when I answer those questions in kind of an obtuse way, I'm testing the other person to see if they're interested in that deeper explanation of what it is that I do. And if they want to have that conversation, I've just found a new friend.
Or frankly, to see if it's safe.
Yeah, right.
It's not easy to be a musician in the world. It's not. And so, when you make a statement that is definitive and that is not obtuse, to use your word, I cannot tell you the magnitude of healing and the magnitude of, emboldening and empowerment that says. I remember a time in my life when I would not say I'm a musician. I always said I'm a teacher. I'm a high school teacher. I'm a high school teacher. Or if I was feeling, pretty snarky and I was in the back of a cab with a cab driver I'd never meet again, I'd tell him, I'm a neurosurgeon. Or whatever, something that we perceive to be important,
Right.
But this is where reading Carl Palnick's words actually changed everything for me. And I share them with every student that I've ever worked with, which is that, he makes the analogy, he says, if you were an ER doctor, nobody would say that your job was unimportant, because somebody's going to show up in your ER one night and they're going to have some terrible thing wrong with them. And they're going to say, doctor, please save my life. Please help me. Right. But people don't realize that people show up in the concert hall with those same problems. And they're asking us to do that for them in a different way, of course. If he says, if an answer to world peace or to, the complete discord in the world or whatever is going to come from anybody ever, it's going to come from artists. First. And I don't know about you, but for my singers in Choral Chameleon, in Empire City Men's Chorus, for my students here in New York, and for all those that I've ever had, really, choir is so much more to them than just a place to sing. I'll share one quick just anecdote in that way. I had a choir member at one point in one of my choruses who was perpetually late to rehearsal. 45 minutes late every week. And I'm a patient person. And I was patient for a long time. I finally lost it and, told him, if you're going to show up here 45 minutes late every week, then don't bother coming, because all these other people got here on time and we've got stuff we got to get done here.
Right.
And the next day I was walking down Fifth Avenue and my cell phone rang. And is this Mr. Peterson? Yes. Please hold for the doctor. And suddenly this doctor, who I didn't know, was on the phone telling me that this very same person had had a stroke and had listed me as his next of kin.
Oh, wow.
On his form, because there wasn't anybody else.
Yeah.
So if that story resonates with people, I think it should say that my job as a choir director is, at least to that one person, and I'm sure you can imagine to many others, a lot more important than people think it is.
Yep.
It's a huge responsibility. In a school, it's a loaded responsibility, So, I think that knowing what I know about you, because I did the particular, requisite internet stalking, so on and so forth, did my homework too.
Right.
I think that if I were in your shoes doing the things that you do and knowing the number of lives that you touch and, respecting the incredible work you're doing on this podcast, everything, I would own that. I wouldn't be obtuse at all about what I do. And so when you craft your Credo, I'll be really excited to read it. And I think it needs to be the type of statement that some students work on it for 3 months They just keep really wordsmithing it. But when you finally arrive at it and you say those words out loud, oh my God, does it change everything? It changes everything, Chris. Everything.
That's awesome.
It gives new meaning to everything you do. It uncovers meaning where you didn't even know there was meaning there. And so, you go through these questions. There's 14 questions. One way to do it would be to just work on one question a day for a while. Come back, talk to somebody you trust about it. Hey, I answered these questions. What do you think? And then begin to craft the statement. And
would it be okay? Would it be okay for me to share the questions with the audience?
Sure. Yeah,
I could
absolutely.
put
This
it
is
in the
not
show
any
notes.
proprietary thing. And I would say this: it's about pulling the camera lens back from the picture. Oftentimes, our gaze is too close to the page. Ironically, when musicians are having trouble sight reading, they're too much in the weeds. They're too close to the page, right? So the idea is pulling the lens back from the page so you can see the whole picture.
Yep.
And
then would it be okay if would you do me the honor of allowing me to read yours?
Of course.
Would that be okay?
I would be deeply honored
to
have you read
I was
it.
thinking that would be good. So we kind of wrap up this part of this conversation because there's some other stuff I want to talk to you about.
Okay.
But now that you've kind of explained what it is that you're doing when you create this with someone, and that maybe, if the listener will know then that these questions will be in the show notes, they can go download the PDF and kind of look through these and engage in this work on their own. But then you might come up with something like what Vince has come up with. So this is Vince's musician's credo, and it starts like this. I am Vince Peterson. I am a musician. Music is my one true vocation. I will not leave it, and it will not leave me. Music is my best friend. I believe music is a modality and a force that is continually undulating in the world. I live for witnessing it rush through the hands, hearts, and faces of those around me. I am placed in the world to serve music with humility. I put the demands of music in the center of my heart before fame, money, notoriety, or public deference. I am called to teach, compose, conduct, and produce music as my primary source of sustenance. I assert my lifelong commitment to this, and therefore my professional expectations of those for whom and with I invoke music. I believe in the human voice as the primary instrument of civilization. I believe in the power of the human psyche being attached to the voice. I believe the psyche is intrinsically connected to the sound. I believe in the innate power of human voices in chorus to change the world. I celebrate the ingenuity of physical instruments and their connection to the earth's precious natural resources. I believe in sound as a physical substance with medicinal properties. I believe in music as a metaphor for the human form. I believe in the universality of the raw materials and syntax of music and their kinship across genres, styles, generations, geography, space, and time. I believe in both the horizontal and vertical axes of music. I hearken to their dialogue and long to converse with them. I believe that the study of music is synonymous with wonder and awe. I believe in the equality of integrity and interpretation in rendering any score. I believe the most authentic musicking possible comes from love before anything else. Wow, that's pretty awesome. And in a lot of ways, every sentence I was reading there resonated with me a lot. In fact, I could see some statements in there that are already very similar to some of the answers to the questions that I gave you. In particular, this is the one that kind of got me right at the very beginning. So when you said, I live for witnessing it rush through the hands, hearts, and faces of those around me, that was my answer to your first question. I facilitate experiences for the singers around me because I get a lot out of that. when we sing something with my students, that is just coursing through them, and they're no longer up in their own heads about whether or not they suck at singing or they hate themselves because they're teenagers or whatever. When that goes away and they're just singing, I do feel an incredible euphoria. And that is, for me, that's huge. So yeah, I am definitely going to share this activity with the audience and encourage them to participate in this. And I'll do one as well. So I'll be working on this over the next little while, and I'll reach out to you.
I'll say two things really quick.
Yeah.
One, thank you for that. I don't mind saying to all of your listeners and saying publicly on the podcast that, today and this week, and frankly, this last month, indeed, that was a much needed thing for me to go back to. It was really healing to hear a new friend read that, and with such presence as well. But please share with me what you do. I would be honored to look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for sticking around to the end of an episode, although this one really isn't the end of an episode. Don't forget, there is going to be a part 2 coming out about a week after this one. So, of course, you could be listening to this at any point, but if there is no part 2 in your podcast player yet, that's just because I'm going to put a few days in between, about a week in between, and you'll be able to get that second part of the conversation, which goes a different direction, you guys. I'm just going to warn you, it's a different type of conversation, but like I said, it's adjacent. It's all dreaming and hoping for ways to make music education better. All right, another shout out, of course, as always, to the Patreon producers. There is a producer level. If you want to go beyond $3 a month and really you feel like this show provides you value and you want to help me pay for it so that I don't ever have to stop doing it, you can become a producer and I'll shout you out on each show. And that is, our current producers are Ulrika Igrain Munoz Alarcon, Chandler Smith, David Kowalczyk, James Mock, Kyle Peterson, Michael Herron, Ryan Main, and Steve and Kathy Kukacek. So head over to patreon.com/Chorosophy and join the support group over there. Another way you can help, of course, and you can be a part of the action, so to speak, and that is really just to be a part of the conversation. That's honestly what I want from you most of all. If you feel like this show helps you, help me by being part of the conversation. It's easier for me to do this job when I know what you're thinking about and what your thoughts are on certain topics, because podcasts really work best when they are a conversation. So let's talk about the ways you can do that. You can like, you can share, you can comment. So anytime I interact on social media with content from the show, drop a thought, drop a question. Right? Those are great ways to do it. And then, of course, when you do that, you're also helping other people see the show. There is, of course, the option of sending an email to chorosophy@gmail.com and just asking me a question. There's also a form that you can fill out on the main page of chorosophy.com, and whether it be request to be on the show, you could request to have your choir appear on the show in the Student Perspectives series. There's also the Chorolosophers Facebook group. So basically, I'm just trying to be all over the internet, so that if you need to find me to reach out and have your thoughts be known, then please do that, because that really does shape and guide the direction of the show when listeners create some kind of response. So do that if you can. And then, of course, like I said, there are tons of other ways to reach out and find me. I'm very easy to find. And then last but not least, hit up our sponsors, which I didn't talk about in this episode because there's a lot going on with this Vince Peterson episode, but those vocevista.com/Chorosophy there. You can also go to sitereadingfactory.com, graphitepublishing.com, and ryanmain.com for sheet music. And then there's, of course, mymusicfolders.com, mychoirrobes.com, any of those websites. Every time you make a purchase, you can plug in Chorosophy at checkout and get a discount. All right, see you guys later. Tune in for part 2.